Hi, everyone. Welcome to Ascend's Women in Leadership Fireside Chat. I'm so excited to be joined by Amy Bunszel, Executive Vice President at Autodesk in the product organization. She is an inspiring leader, and I know we're going to learn so much from her today. I'm Shivani Berry. I am the CEO and founder of Ascend. We offer an online leadership program to help women move into management. Our mission is to elevate 10,000 women into leadership. It's a big way we're going to create the change that we need to see in today's workplaces. And we're doing it. We've had graduates from top companies like Google, Salesforce, Autodesk, and DoorDash. So much of the program is curated by senior leaders who've been in your shoes. I really think we need to have more open and honest conversations around what it takes to move up in our careers and get to the top. And that's why we host these fireside chats. I am so excited to be here with Amy. So I first learned about Amy from our Ascenders who were on her team and participated in the Ascend's leadership program. And they raved about her. So I knew I had to meet her. And when I did, I was blown away. Amy, thank you so much for joining us. I'm honored to be here with you.
Oh, thank you, Shivani. I'm excited to be here too. And I love supporting your mission. It's really an important and wonderful mission that you have.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I really appreciate that. So let's dive in. I would love to hear about your career story. What brought you to where you are today?
Absolutely. So by background, I'm an electrical engineer, and I have a master's degree in microwave engineering, which none of that has been directly useful to me in my career. But what my engineering education taught me was really a lot about decision making and really about leadership during my whole entire career journey. So I started out as a hardware engineer, quickly moved into software, explored probably for the first 10 years of my career. I probably had 5 or 6 jobs, lots of experimentation and exploration. And then I ended up starting a company with some colleagues of mine, and we built a startup in 1996, and it got acquired by Autodesk in 2003. Came to Autodesk, thought I was going to stay for 2 years, and ended up now having been here for 19 years in quite a few different roles. Started as a product manager and moved up the ranks, and now I'm responsible for pretty much the whole team that builds our architecture, engineering, and construction design portfolio.
Great, I love that. And that's such an interesting career journey. I'd love to hear a little bit. Let's get into it a little bit more. So like, what's an inflection point in your life or in your career that has shaped your career trajectory or shaped who you are as a leader?
Oh, wow. There were many, but the one that comes to my mind the most is a big internal move that I took within Autodesk. So I had moved to Portland, Oregon. I was living there for 8 years, very happy in my job running our Inventor team, which is our manufacturing division. And the AutoCAD job came up. AutoCAD was the company's biggest product. It would have required me moving to California. I remember having a very quick conversation with my husband about what if we moved to California? And then I raised my hand for the job. I had a sort of a terrifying week of, talking to lots of senior leaders, trying to figure out if it would work. And then took the job, moved to California. And, what that did for me at work was prove to the leadership that I was sort of multidimensional, that I could work in different types of organizations, that I could work on different types of products. And it gave me without, leaving the company, it gave me a much broader perspective onto what the company was really all about. And I really view that as really pivotal to me getting future opportunities and ending up in the C-suite where I am today.
I love that. I think that's such a great call out about without you leaving the company. That's part of the reason why I really like your story, because I think so often people think they have to go to a new company to get a new experience, which can be the case, but there are ways to build your career within a company. I'm curious, how do you raise your hand for those kind of opportunities? How do you make sure you're like, one, people know that you want them, and two, they can see why you're ready for them?
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting. Most companies have an internal process that I think a lot of people don't pay attention to, because I'll tell you, companies like it when this happens, because it's really, you've invested in someone, and it's great if they can find their next opportunity within your company. So normally the way it works for Autodesk is you go and talk to the hiring manager and just have a very casual, informal conversation to see if there's mutual interest. And if if the job is not interesting, then conversation's over. Or if you don't have the qualifications, the conversation's over. And so it's very informal. And then if you decide to move forward, then it's really time to talk to your manager and have a conversation about, what's interesting about the job. And for me, it's best when it's done in the spirit of, hey, I want to learn something new, and I think this role is good for me, than if you're kind of frame it as like running away from something per se, right? It's really about an opportunity, and a good manager will help you find that opportunity regardless of where you are.
Yeah, that's a great point about how you frame it, and it's positive, and it's talking about growing and driving that impact around it. That's a question that I get a lot from ascenders, is around like, how do I advocate for myself to like make it known that I want to go and take on to the next opportunity,
Mhm.
but still be seen as a team player in my current role. So not be seen as like, sometimes they see it as like, oh, I'm like being greedy, you're not a team player. What advice would you give to that?
So two things. One, I would say be open with your manager if you're interested in certain types of kind of growth opportunities, and help your manager understand what you might be interested in, because sometimes we make decisions quickly sort of and we can't go around and ask everybody what they want to do. But if we know what someone's interested in, then we can often tap them for something additional. And I would also say look around for opportunities or gaps, problems that aren't being solved that are important to your manager or to leadership, and volunteer to go and help address a gap that you see in your company.
I love that. How do you recommend people find those gaps or opportunities?
It's good if they're kind of close to your work. I think if you think so that it makes sense that you're working on it, I think it might be seen as awkward if you're like, way too over into someone else's sandbox, if you will. But I think if you look at ways where, maybe your team could be more productive, or maybe you and your peers are having conversations about something, and you are, I think a lot of us go into solve mode. Well, maybe instead of just talking about solving it, maybe, approach your manager and say, hey, we have an idea, or I have an idea to go make this situation better for people. And then, see what they say.
Yeah, I can't think of a manager who would not be excited
I know.
by their team being proactive about that.
I agree.
Yeah, I think so much of it is that you seizing the opportunity, not waiting for it to come to you, and just being
Right.
proactive about it and seeking it out. And then, in my experience, you ask and they say, no, it's not a big deal. They at least know
No,
that
it's
you're
not a big deal, but you've demonstrated that you're open
yeah.
to take on more or to try new things. And that's as important as, the person saying yes.
Yeah, definitely. Something I live by is you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take.
Yes,
So
very
if you're not
true.
going to ask, they're not going to know that you want it.
Yep.
So I would love to dive into more about your experience, especially, I imagine you're often the only woman in the room. And many of the women watching this are also often the only woman in the room, or perhaps another underrepresented minority. And I know from personal experience that can feel very intimidating and lonely. How do you win people's respect in the room when they question your credibility? When you're coming in, they just make a quick judgment on whether or not you're qualified. Like, what strategies have you used? What advice would you have for us around that?
Well, that is a very large question. Well, I'll say one thing first. It's happening less and less, which is exciting to me. That more often than not, there's at least one other woman in the room, and sometimes even that, you can kind of build a way of kind of communicating where you can support each other in that situation. But if you are the only woman in the room, I usually think about a few things. One is like, why are you in the room? They probably invited you, to the meeting or to the project because you bring a certain skill set and you have some knowledge and you're contributing in some way. So I think sometimes what I would do, and I suggest people do, is remember that you're probably really knowledgeable about something, and more so than everybody else there. So have that kind of internal conversation with yourself about what you're bringing kind of to the table and to the project. And if you lean into that, and that's where you address your comments and you show your confidence, people will normally realize that, oh yes, that's why Amy's here, or that's why Shivani's here, because we asked them to come and represent this particular area. That's the best case, I think, scenario. There are times where I find you have to assert yourself with maybe differing opinions. And one of the expressions I've been talking about this week with people, oddly, was kind of saying like, that is not my understanding. This is what I'm seeing. or, so instead of maybe creating an argument, create a different point of view so that you're kind of enhancing the scope of the conversation in the room, because that also helps people. If too many people in a meeting or something are too like-minded, then people kind of gravitate towards maybe the least common denominator. But if you're there providing alternatives and offering other suggestions, that can also help people see value in your contribution.
Yeah, I love that. And, taking a on a related note, how do you get your ideas? How do you drive alignment with people who are being difficult stakeholders? So it might not be because of how you look. It could just be they're just being difficult in
Difficult.
general. I'm sure you come across this many times.
Yep.
So what do you do to get their support to establish credibility in that situation to really like be able to collaborate with these difficult stakeholders?
Yes. Well, so I will acknowledge some people are just difficult and you might not be able to fix the situation, but that happens. But I would say in the best situation, I try to understand what that person is, what their goals are, what does success look like for them? And then I try to kind of create a situation where, is there a way for us to both be successful in terms of, what I need to get accomplished and what you need to get accomplished. And so it requires, I think, having a little empathy that maybe there's something going on in the background that you don't know. And then also, but coming in with kind of those negotiation skills almost about thinking about like, what does success look like for both of you? It's interesting. One of the classes I took a long time ago was a negotiations class. And it's super interesting skill set to have, really from a collaboration perspective, not from a nefarious kind of way, but it's helps you really understand people and get to a win-win in many cases.
Yeah, agreed. I think so often when we're in these tough situations, it feels like war or us against them.
Mhm.
And often it's not. You're still working towards the same company goal or the same like team goal. And having that mindset of like that win-win
Yep.
will help you win, like will actually help you win that person over and both be successful.
And something else that's important in our culture is that it's okay to escalate. Sometimes maybe the answer there, you can't get the answer. And so in that case, we ask people to, escalate respectively together, not to go around each other, but to really bring it forward to the next level of leadership together and then have the conversation. And I think if people feel heard, they're much more willing to kind of disagree and commit and move on.
Yeah, I think that point about escalate together is really important. I know one of my biggest blowups in my career was when I escalated without looping them in. And so then it came across as being political and going behind their back. And that was not my intention at all. I hadn't even thought about that. But now in hindsight, I'm like, yeah, okay, I can see why they would think like that. And it just made the situation 10x worse.
Well, because sometimes I find I go into solve mode before I think about, okay, what's the best way to, escalate? I just go, because I know a lot of people, right? And you know who to go to. But you really have to step back and think about how you're doing it, not just that it needs to happen.
Exactly. I think that's the big part that I've missed in the past. And that was actually a huge driver for creating a Sense leadership program. Because I was like, wait, we need to know how to influence. And so much of it is not just you having the right idea. Because so often I feel like I know what I'm doing and I know how to get, like, I know what the right solution is. But that's very little of the part of the success. It's actually about how do you get other people on board, and like actually working with them to get things. And so it's strategic. And like you said, like knowing negotiation or knowing these other things is really important. And, one of the things that really stuck out to me as you were sharing is talking about like, learn about their goals, about what makes them successful. How do you figure this out when you're working with someone who you're like, who's new or a difficult stakeholder is not really giving you a lot of information?
Wow. Well, sometimes you can use your network within the company to ask other people who might be working with the person. And these days, I think so many of us have OKRs and there's lots of information on the corporate internet in many ways that might even give you clues as to what's important to certain people you might be working with.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I think there is a lot more intel out there than we
Yep.
initially think around it. And, one of the things I think that I found really powerful is allies in helping to win over these difficult stakeholders.
Mhm.
What strategies, how have you leveraged allies? How do you think about building allies? How do you go about doing it?
Well, when I made that big internal move that I mentioned, it was really helpful that I knew a bunch of people that were on the AutoCAD side of the company, so that when I came into the role, They had advocated for me to get the position, so that was very helpful. And when I came into the role, they also helped me kind of figure out the new environment. So I think allies are super helpful. And one of the ways to create them is just information and knowledge, like you just talked about, like, how do I know what that person's goals are? Like, if you help people by sharing, freely kind of the information that you have, and you drive some degree of transparency, it really pays back over time, because people remember that, oh yeah, Shivani connected me with Amy and Amy helped me do this, or, Shivani shared an article that was really helpful to this problem I was having. So I find that those little things over time, when they're, genuine, really help you build up relationships, so that if you do have a big ask, it's a lot easier to do.
Definitely, definitely. And when you're on, how do you? I have two questions for you. The first one is, when you're working with a new team or working across functional projects, you're just starting to get to know people. How do you cultivate those relationships? How do you build allies with people in those kind of situations?
We do a lot of we do a lot of, I would call it team building, but even in the Zoom environment, we spend time to kind of build trust amongst the team by getting to know each other. And that can include understanding people's career trajectory, learning a little bit about their personal life, whatever people are willing to share. I think it's important to start to build up trust, especially as you go on to try to deliver some, probably some pretty challenging projects. So that's a big piece. And I think if the leader can sort of set the stage for sharing and being authentic and driving that trust, it really helps the team kind of rally behind that.
Yeah, definitely. Do you have any tips that you use to build that in a remote environment?
There's a couple that I've heard, that there's one I've heard about but haven't tried yet. It's at the beginning of a meeting, just spend like 10 minutes going around the room asking people sort of like, and families do this at the dinner table, like, what's a rose and what's a thorn, and it could be personal, it can be professional, whatever you feel like sharing, but it gives people an idea of like, where are you at today? What's going on in your world, that rather than a status report, it's something a little more personal that just gives people over time a little more insight into who you are and what's important.
Agreed. Especially because so much of what is going on in our personal life impacts how we show up at work or
Yes.
how we might be responding. So just knowing like, oh, this person had a stressful day at home or has this going on, just also gives you more context and how you're
Yeah.
going to approach them.
Or there was a problem on a project or a win on a project, anything that really helps people understand how things are going for you.
Yeah, definitely. I really love that. One question I have for you is, we often celebrate success, but don't share our failures. If you looked at someone's LinkedIn profile, it's just like looking at yours, it's super impressive. Board, like been a company, moved up quickly. Now like heading an entire organization. And I think as we both know, knowing how to overcome that failure is critical to success. So what's a failure that you've had in your career and what have you learned from it?
Wow. So I would say there've been many. And it's interesting. I get asked about failure a lot, and I try to think about it also as learning. For me, failure is kind of the learning, the uncomfortable learning. Some learning is fun and exciting, but sometimes, if you're not making mistakes, you're not really stretching yourself in some ways, and you're not learning as much. So, one failure that I comes to mind is it's around kind of staffing projects. I think sometimes we get very excited about new projects, and then we put a whole bunch of resources on them, and then they don't know what to do with themselves, because we haven't done the work of really planning it out and building the teams gradually over time. So I feel like there've been a couple projects that I've had that two things have happened. One, too many resources too quickly, and two, not enough interim deliverables, which I think has changed a lot in the world of agile and empowered product teams. But having those interim deliverables to do the validation along the way really avoids throwing away a lot of work in many cases.
Yeah, great. So one question I was requested by our senders from Autodesk to ask you is, what strategies do you use to deal with stress?
So a couple. One, I work out every morning. I have a Peloton like half the planet, it would seem, but I had mine before COVID. So I think for me, it's like having that sort of me time in the morning to do something to invest in myself helps a lot throughout the course of the day, and kind of sets the tone for the day. I also, I think like everybody, we try to create boundaries in terms of, so that work doesn't bleed into every pore of everything that happens. So, I try, not always successfully, but to end the day, leave the computer and kind of move on to dinner or to other things. And then I'll tell you, like, I have a few people and I think everybody should have a few people that they can just, text or what have you, and just say like, I'm so stressed about this, or, and then we kind of support each other and sort of remind each other that yes, while this is stressful, there's so many other things, good that are happening. And I think even just telling someone that I'm stressed makes me feel less stressed in some cases.
For sure. I was fun. I think just saying my emotions out loud.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
just helps.
yep.
Makes me feel more in control of it. Great. Well, last question for you. What's a piece of career advice that you have for us?
Piece of career advice. So I would say, if if you're looking at an opportunity and it interests you, you should raise your hand, even if you don't think, you have 110% of the qualifications done, because in many cases, as a hiring manager, what we put on the job description is sort of the ideal candidate that includes everything we could possibly have wanted. And I find that people, especially women in many cases, don't apply unless they check all the boxes. And I think that's unfortunate. And oftentimes you learn something about yourself, even just by applying, that'll prepare you maybe for the next thing. So I really encourage people to I think take some risk in that area, and think about maybe stretch assignments and not worrying so much about if they hit every single requirement needed.
Yeah. And studies even show this around.
Yeah, there's so much data on this.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed. And so I think so if you're listening to this and thinking about applying for a job, just apply. I know one of the centers I work with, she was the job rec required 3 years of experience. And she's like, should I apply? I only have 2.5. I was like, yes,
Round up.
please.
Yeah.
So that's a really good reminder. Amy, thank you so much for all these like amazing tips, for sharing your journey. I've learned a lot. I'm sure like everyone listening has too. And you're a huge inspiration. So really, really appreciate you joining us. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. My pleasure.